Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Charles Chase has spent his entire career working with high-end analytics to help understand and predict consumer behavior. In his new book, Consumer-Based Forecasting and Planning, Predicting Changing Demand Patterns in the New Digital Economy, Charlie takes his experience and combines it with world-leading analytics powerhouse SAS to deliver an incisive and novel approach to forecasting demand for retailers. In a book and this interview, right for the times, we talk about the changes in people, process, analytics, and technology, plus machine learning, and how that can address our most challenging forecasting opportunities.
Is that there's always going to be collaboration between people and machines. So it's never going to go away. It's going to be minimized. So the machines are going to do more of the heavy load working. So let me explain what I mean. So what you need to do is first take the letters AI and flip them to IA. It's really about intelligent automation supported by machine learning. So what does that mean? That means we want to automate all the mundane, non-value-added work.
Let's listen in now. Charlie, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Very good. Thanks for inviting me on, Michael.
Well, thanks so much for joining me. I have your book in front of me. We're going to get into it. It's a weighty tome of information, and it's actually a great read for the novice and also the expert. So really excited to have the conversation. So let's start at the beginning. First of all, tell me about yourself, your background, and what you do for SAS.
Okay. Well, I'm the executive industry consultant for the SAS Global Retail and Consumer Packaged Goods practice at SAS. Been with SAS about 18 years. Prior to coming to SAS, I worked for 20 years in the consumer packaged goods industry. I started out as a demand analyst, manager, director, senior director, and at several different large corporations, and then ended up at Heineken as the vice president and chief knowledge officer for Heineken USA. And prior to that, I worked for Coke and Johnson & Johnson Consumer Products and Reckitt and Benckiser.
And when you were growing up, is this something, were you always oriented towards business or analytics, or what drove you in the kind of the general direction that you took?
Well, I was always in analytics. In fact, my undergraduate degree was in economics and computer science. And then when I was working on my MBA, I started working for a private company called the Menon Company, which was still owned by the Menon family. I ran across the manager of forecasting, and I happened to be taking a course called business forecasting in my MBA. And I realized I can apply all the statistics that I learned from economics and econometrics. And that's what I majored in. My MBA was econometrics and management, information management. And that's when I became an analyst.
Right on, using those university skills or college skills to putting them to good use. Tell us about SAS. So certainly a well-known brand name or well-known name, or very well respected, but perhaps perhaps not everyone might know or appreciate the full scope and scale. Give us an overview of SAS.
Well, first of all, SAS is the largest privately held software company in the world. We're $3.3 billion in annual sales. We've also are number one in advanced analytics and machine learning by all the big analyst firms like Gartner, Forrester, and others for, I guess, 8 or 9 years in a row now. So we are also number one in machine learning as well as predictive analytics. Been around for about 45 years. Same owner, Dr. Goodnight, has been leading us. Phenomenal place to work. I work in the global headquarters in Raleigh, where we have about 6,000 employees. Globally, we have about 12,000 employees or more. And being in a global position, I get to travel a lot around the world, and I get to meet a lot of really important people, executive levels at big companies like Miller Coors and Nestle and Kellogg and many, many others, Hanes Brands and others.
Right. So a tier one list of customers. I was actually a customer when I was at Rogers Media of your product. I used it for the shopping channel to do our modeling and analytics. And it helped us do some really breakthrough things. So again, I'm excited about having the opportunity to discuss where that sits today. But let's talk about your new book, Consumption-Based Forecasting and Planning, Predicting Changing Demand Patterns in the New Digital Economy. It's an interesting read for sure. Tell me a little bit about who you wrote the book for and the central premise that really retailers should switch from supply-centric to demand-centric approaches.
Uh, yeah, the book is targeted toward executives, but also director levels, so folks that are vice president of supply chain, the CFO, CEO of a company, chief marketing officer, actually, too, because the book talks a lot about moving demand forecasting and planning from the supply chain operations planning, where it is traditionally, to marketing, sales and marketing. I always reported into sales and marketing when I was a senior director of demand forecasting and planning, and I also oversaw marketing analytics. And when I was at Coke, I was part of the global market research organization, primarily overseeing all the syndicated scanner data and POS data and all the SAS programmers, where we did a lot of analytical work, like around frequent shopper data, share wallet, things like that, and long range and medium range forecasting, marketing mix modeling. Mm-hmm. So I applied all that during my days when I was already applying that information. In my early days when I was working at J&J Consumer Products, where I reported into the vice president of marketing as the director of demand forecasting and planning. So I was already positioned downstream, closer to the consumer. I had access to POS data, also to syndicated scanner data, Nielsen and IRI. So we were able to integrate that information in with the shipment data. Most companies today are forecasting from supply to the consumer. And the reason we're doing that is because their demand planners are too far removed from the consumer upstream in the supply chain and operations planning. And they're forecasting shipments. So shipments is actually the supply signal. And a lot of companies over the years have moved to sales orders, thinking that was true demand. And actually sales orders is a replenishment signal. The true demand for both a retailer and a consumer packaged company is the POS data and the syndicated scanner data. That's true demand. If you're too far removed upstream from the consumer in the supply chain, you don't have access to that data or a really good understanding of those things that sales and marketing folks do to influence demand, like in-store merchandising, displays, features, those things. And then you need to have more of an advanced analytics background. Most demand planners today are really managers of information and data. They have very little analytics background. Mm-hmm. When I was a director, I hired right out of universities graduate students that had master's degrees in statistics, econometrics. So they were demand analysts. They already knew how to apply the analytics. And I taught them the business, which only took about 30 days. And they were building models and adding value almost immediately.
It's true. As I read through the book, I saw it at both levels, because some parts are very good book to be read by executives who oversee or who are influenced or who influence demand and supply and marketing, and others. There's some practitioners, because there's a few models, a few formulas in here that if you're in that business, you're going to love. Let's talk about this. You called it signals. Let's talk about the noise to signal ratio that we're currently experiencing, right? So, and you touch on it in your book when you're talking about a wake-up call. How do you handle the abnormal historical data after it's over? I mean, certainly edge cases and unusual things were happening in the before time, pre-COVID. But it feels those outliers, and this is where I'd like you to chime in. It feels like those outliers would kind of be ignored by the models because they were seen as outliers and you didn't want to chase them down too far. How do you know over time what's the outlier and what's a trend that you need to pay attention to and then rejig your logs to figure that out?
Well, let's start with the outliers. Most outliers are cleansed out of the data manually by demand planners. That's one of the key things that they do. They cleanse the data into what we call base and promoted. They separate the data and then they try to piece it back together manually in an Excel spreadsheet, because their technology can't correct for outliers on the fly automatically. One of the great things about SAS is we have automatic outlier detection. It automatically finds these outliers. In many cases, many of the outliers are really important, and they're not really outliers in the sense of the word that it's a one-time occurrence. Mm-hmm. Even if it is, you want to capture that one-time occurrence. So, many times we make the outlier detection more sensitive than normal, and it'll pick up more outliers. In many cases, those outliers are positive, and they're actually promotion lifts. And we'll go back to our customer and say, did you run a promotion here, here, and here? Mm-hmm. And they'll say, yeah, how did you know that? I said, well, our outlier detection picked it up. It's using advanced analytics and optimization and it finds those outliers and corrects for them automatically and says, this is an outlier, so I'm going to correct for it. But maybe it's not an outlier. And if it's not, then we want to leave it in. So that's another way of capturing those promotion lists without having to cleanse the data. So all this work they do, all they have to do is, if they had SAS, is just say, turn the sensitivity up a little bit, and the automatic outlier, and it would automatically find them and correct for them. Or you can then investigate those outliers and determine whether or not they're important, and if they are, will they happen again in the future? And also, if you're looking at only trend and seasonality, if you're using a very simple model, and that's how most ERP solutions, enterprise resource planning solutions use very simple models that only look at trend and seasonality. If there's an unforeseen disruption like COVID-19, those trends and seasonality are no longer valid in the history. So what do you do?
Right.
So what you have to do is think outside the box. And I said, what do you mean by that, Charlie? Well, I mean that what are those things that are causing this disruption? And can you use them to influence demand for your products? So one of the things that we did, we worked with a Russian an online retailer. And in the middle of the pandemic, during the lockdown, they were seeing as much as 200% increases in some of the products that were essential and 50% decreases in those products that were non-essential. So those that were essential were increasing, exponentially. So we started to work with them, and the first thing we did is we said we're going to apply machine learning, some learning models, more advanced predictive analytics. We're going to bring into play their point of sale data, Google Trends data for those categories, epidemiological data, and regional economic data. And as we started to add that information, we realized that there was a strong what we would call correlation or influence by those outside factors on the products. And we're able to, and allowed us to predict those increases in those products and the decreases as well. So we were able to improve their accuracy from around 70% prior to the COVID-19 impact to 91% in the middle. It's not just about trend and seasonality. It's about what are those things that are causing people to change or shift their demand patterns for my products. And you have to find the data that's associated with that and then use that data in a predictive model to model that influence. And then if you layer on top of that machine learning, it improves it even further because the machine learning starts to learn after a few cycles. And it starts picking up those patterns based on those outside factors and improves it even further.
Now, is that the art and science of building SaaS products with you and your thousands of colleagues do? They look at, it's so interesting, epidemiological data, Google data. Do you calibrate the importance of a gauge on how much those influence the model baked into the product? Like how much would you say your team continues to tweak the models that then the end user has to play with? And I guess where I'm going with that is, how do you guys sort out the difference between let's make sure that there's enough power in the model versus too much flexibility in the hands that could throw it off it could be just a bit too confusing even for the advanced user? How do you balance those two things?
Well, there's a lot of people think that the more data that you throw in there, the better. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, if you have too much data, you're underutilizing the important factors in the model versus those that are non-important. So you can overestimate the model, especially when you're using machine learning. Well, that's classic. But you can do that with almost any predictive model if you, So it's all about finding the right factors that are causing that impact and are influencing that impact, I should say.
Right.
And then also, I find that if you have more than 10 or 12 factors in a model, you probably have too many. At least that's been my experience. Some people put 50 factors in there. So once you have that optimization, you're explaining, 85 to 90% of what's going on. That's pretty good, for a model. You're never going to predict 100% with a model. And the art is not, a lot of people misinterpret what the art is and what the art and science of forecasting and modeling. The art isn't about being able to use your gut feeling judgment. There's been a lot of work done out there that says, rule of thumb or judgment or heuristics judgment. That doesn't necessarily work so well. And that was proven by many different research studies. It's all about understanding what are those things the art comes in as understanding what are those things that impact my product. So for example, One of the companies I worked with prior to coming to SAS had a product, an oven cleaner product. Unfortunately, I can't give you the name of it. I'm probably still under NDA for that. I'm not sure. But anyway, just to protect everyone. The sales for this oven cleaner was declining. So the product manager, and I was in marketing, and I told all the product managers, before you make a judgment call, come to my team and let's see if we can model it and find the data before you do that, because that's more accurate. So they came to me and said, I think there is a correlation between self-cleaning ovens and this oven cleaning product that we sell, and it's negative. As people buy more self-cleaning ovens, they don't use this product to clean their oven anymore. Makes sense to me, right? So we went out and found that there was an oven association for, I think it was like $90 or $100. You could become a member and download all the data you want. So we downloaded all the self-cleaning oven data, and we added that to the model. So that one factor that we added to the model increased the accuracy by 10%. And he was absolutely correct. It was having a negative impact on the brand. So as more people bought self-cleaning ovens, the less they use this product. Now, because I was in marketing, that led to some market research that they decided to do. And they found out that most people didn't like the self-cleaning oven feature as much as they thought, even though they use it. And the reason for that is it takes 4 hours, it heats up the kitchen, and it smells really bad because it literally burns off.
Yeah.
So you have to turn it on, open your windows, and go to the mall shopping. So that led to new positioning of that product, that oven cleaning product. And what they did is said, use our oven cleaning product in between self-cleaning oven events to spot clean your oven, so you don't have to use your self-cleaning oven feature so much. And guess what? That turned around the brand and led to positive growth for that particular product. So when you combine this marketing efforts, you combine predictive analytics, you go after the data that's responsible for causing these challenges. And by the way, we don't have problems, right? Just challenges and opportunities. Yeah. So the challenge was to find out what's having a negative impact on this product. How can we turn that product around? And that was the challenge, and we were able to do that. That wouldn't have happened if I was reporting upstream in the supply chain and operations planning, because all they care about is costs and reducing costs and meeting demand with the most efficient supply response and customer service. And all those are good, don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't have led to all the things I just mentioned about this oven cleaning story. True story, by the way.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it highlights the subjective versus the analytical. The two need to work in concert together. Yeah. Last question on this. I mean, it's been 18 months of unusual events, and I've talked to other folks who are, retailers are like trying to figure out how their sales are versus 2019 versus 2020, because the entire year was such an outlier. How are you guys thinking about building that into the models? I mean, where it's been 18 months of outlier edge events, not single events. Is that something you've tweaked the model so that you kind of say, maybe we need more agility in the model? Maybe, again, you're talking about less elements than more. And any last words on how SAS is looking at helping their customers figure this out?
Yeah, as we move, from each phase of the pandemic to finally, hopefully, to the pandemic going away or subsiding to a point where everyone would get a normal flu shot every year with the COVID, supplement to it, or booster, as we say. And we would still keep that data in the models. And as it declines, those factors that are influencing it, they will decline as well. The epidemiological data, those Google trends will change. And we can leave those in the model until we get to a point where we only need maybe 3 years to 5 years of history, and it's outside that historical range. Then it would just drop off. Right. And then we would bring in other factors. So you're always bringing in new factors. It's not something where you do it one time and then the model's perfect. And it's also not a model. I love it when people say, Charlie, what's the model you use for all our products? We
build models. Your product builds models, right? Is that probably a better characterization?
Our product uses first generation AI, which is most people refer to as an expert system. And it's based on a lot of different rules as well. And it automatically builds the models for you very well, by the way. And it's interesting because I'll go in and I'll try to beat the system, build my own models because I'm an econometrician. And if I do beat it, it's only by a few percentage points, which is pretty amazing. Because
a few more hours of work behind those few percentage points, I'm sure.
And the whole idea is to let the analytics do all the heavy lifting and only make adjustments based on I call it low touch forecasting, or on an exception basis. So in other words, instead of a demand planner touching every single product, every single forecasting cycle, which is probably almost impossible using Excel because you have millions of forecasts. If you look at the hierarchy of a company, we also forecast in a hierarchy, our system, which has been proven to be more accurate, but you want them only to touch those other 10 to 15% of the products that you can't forecast because you either don't have enough history, or you don't have the factors, or there's a lot of sparse data where a lot of zeros in the data. That's where you want them to focus. You want them to focus on the other products that the system outperforms them almost 100% of the time with analytics. And that's really our objective. So it's not uncommon for our customers to start out, before they use SAS, touching 70% of their products because their analytical technology and their legacy system is really basic, to going to the opposite, where they accept 70% of the products that are being forecasted by our statistical engine and only touching 30%. In many cases, over time, they're only down to 10%.
Lightens the workload. You've mentioned a couple of times, we've mentioned a couple of times AI, ML, machine learning, and you talk about it extensively in the book. For everyone, let's make sure everyone understands what AI and ML are from your perspective versus clever programming. Where are we on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being really it's just fancy programming, and 10 being, this is world-changing kind of, true machine learning. How do you think of the definition between the two? Because sometimes it's a little blurry when people talk about it. AI is really just good programming sometimes. How do you think about it, and how much impact do you think it has today and will have in the years to come?
Okay, great question. Well, first of all, most people think AI is going to solve world hunger and that the machines are going to take over the world. And I tell them that only happens in the movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Judgment Day. Yeah, we're just waiting for Judgment Day.
Yeah. Is that there's always going to be collaboration between people and machines. So it's never going to go away. It's going to be minimized. So the machines are going to do more of the heavy load working. So let me explain what I mean. So what you need to do is first take the letters AI and flip them to IA. It's really about intelligent automation supported by machine learning. So what does that mean? That means we want to automate all the mundane, non-value-added work that people do, in this case, demand planners and our Excel spreadsheets, like cleansing the data, manipulating the data. That can be completely automated. And then applying machine learning to make them smarter. So one of the things that we could do at SAS, we have something called assisted demand planning. It's patented, where it actually learns over time from the demand planner's adjustments, manual adjustments, and determines when they are adding value, when they make an adjustment to the statistical forecast, and where they're not adding value, and where the statistical forecast is always more accurate, and then tells them where to make adjustments in the product hierarchy, where not to, what direction, either raise or lower it, and stay within a range. And we found that actually reduces the time it takes a demand planner to finalize a forecast by as much as 50%, and improves their accuracy, their value add, by anywhere between 6.3 and 9.2%. You can see how many kind of nutrition I'm giving.
Yeah, you're very precise.
Yeah. And we've applied this at 2 companies very effectively, and each time we apply it, it gets more and more accurate. So you think about it that way. It's really about intelligent automation. And by the way, machine learning models have been proven not to be 100% effective across every situation. In fact, sometimes basic predictive models are just as accurate.
Right.
And however, but see, people, they go after one thing instead of saying it's really a toolbox. So you have to think about analytics as a toolbox of different types of modeling and analytics. And you want to apply the right toolbox to the right situation. So I always talk about a mechanic. Let's say you take your car to an auto mechanic. What is the first thing they do today? They plug it in to your onboard computer, to a giant diagnostics machine. Okay. And it goes around and it diagnoses the problem, and it tells them exactly where the problem is, and they know exactly what part to replace. Now, they have a whole set of tools that they have to use. They don't just use one tool. So if they had a hammer, and how would they fix that part if they only had a hammer? They have all kinds of tools that will help them get to that part, take it out, replace it, and then put everything back. They don't just use a hammer. And they have a diagnostics machine that diagnoses the situation, that uses predictive analytics for the most part to tell them where the potential problem is. So instead of replacing a very expensive part, it may only be a very inexpensive part. So you have to look at applying analytics that way across all your challenges, all the situations that you're looking at to apply. Some cases you don't need to apply machine learning. A typical predictive analytic model that's not a machine learning model, that doesn't have a learning algorithm, will be just as good. And a lot of research has been done recently by a gentleman named Spiros Makrodakis out of Greece, and he's done these M1 through M6 competitions starting in the early 80s up until about 2 years ago. And the last one 2 years ago found that when you combine a machine learning model with a traditional predictive model, or not even what we call a time series model, it looks at trend and seasonality, those models, which we call ensemble models, outperform all the other models. And if you use just a machine learning algorithm by itself, it usually fails. So it's also about combining models as well. That's something new that we're learning.
Yeah. Wow. So this symphony of math, basically, that you put in the hands of users to kind of conduct and pull tools out of toolkits and all these things. When do you think, or are we at the point where it all comes together and you could get to something like predictive retail? So I know before any demand happens what the demand is going to be, and even take it to its farthest reach. I'm going to send that product to the consumer because based on everything I know on the models and AI and IA and the machine learning, I know they're going to want that item. Is that science fiction, or is that a possible future?
No, that's possible. Anticipatory analytics, we call that. And I talk about that quite a bit in the book, where a good example is today we can forecast and do analytics at the edge. So what do I mean by that? I talk about that also in the last chapter. So you can be a large retailer and you can have beacons in the store, for example, and you can triangulate those beacons, and you can collect data at that point, at the edge in the store, and using something called event stream processing and combining that with machine learning, you can start to uncover patterns and make decisions right there in the store. Send a signal back to replenish the shelf, send an order back to the retailer warehouse, and even go further all the way back to the manufacturer. But let's stop for a minute and let's go forward a little bit. So I'm Charlie Chase. I like European style suits. I'm a size regular 40. I like black, blue, brown, and gray. So I walk into a large, big box retailer that sells suits, and I opted into their program online, and I have my profile. They've been tracking my purchases wherever I travel. I live in Raleigh. I happen to be in New York, so I go to one of their stores on the east side, and the minute I walk in the store, my iPhone is on, and it connects automatically those beacons to me and says, "Hey, Charlie Chase is in the store, and he's walking toward men's suits, the men's department." So before I even get halfway to the men's department, I'm getting pinged with promotion saying, "We have European style cut suits. Here are the different brands in your size 40 and blue and black. And we also have gray and brown on our West Side store. Would you like us to wrap those up for you and send them to your house?" Now, how cool is that? I haven't even gotten the men's suits. And by the way, it's giving me a promotion saying it's 30% off today,
right, for
those same suits. So I'm getting a coupon in the store on my iPhone, and I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is say yes, and they're going to ship them to my house.
It's an interesting example because we used to struggle sometimes with how to detect behavior that's going to happen anyway and behavior that we need to change with an incentive. So you described, for example, in that instance, I'm going to get 30%. Maybe you were going there because you were getting that suit anyway, and I didn't need to offer you an incentive. I just needed to speak to you in a very relevant way. Any thoughts on that? I mean, I've struggled with that in different roles. I know a lot of retailers kind of figure out what's the difference between motivating changing behavior and allowing organic behavior to run its course with some clever communications.
Well, we have a product called CI 360 that allows you to track your customers online on their mobile device as they look at and how they search online for products, and then you could start to remarket your and change the way you're marketing to those consumers because you're capturing that information in real time. And that's another way. That's something different than forecasting and planning. But it can complement it as well. A good example is when we launch a new product, we can use text mining and sentiment analysis. Once we forecast the new product launch, let's say we're in week 3 or 4 of that launch, we can actually start to crawl out on the internet and see what people are saying about it on this new product on Facebook, on Twitter, and other vehicles, and determine whether they like the product, did they like the promotion, did they find it on shelf, and also capture what they're saying about it. I wish it came in this color or this flavor. Now you're capturing sustainability information about how to come out with line extensions in the future with different colors and flavors. And then if they like the promotion and now you're in week 6 or 7 and you start to see sales starting to wane, a little bit decline, you can then run that promotion again. And if they can't find it on shelf, you can reach out to your sales team and say, hey guys, how come this is not on shelf? You need to talk to retailers, get this product on shelf. People like it. You go to marketing and say, hey, you should start looking at developing different flavors, different colors for this product, different package sizes, because this is information we're capturing in real time using digital technology.
Right. It's very interesting. All right, last question for you. What are you hearing from the people you talk to? You travel the world, either in real airplanes or virtually, I'm sure, talking to people. What are the top 3 things that retailers are asking that you'd want to share with the listeners? Kind of top 3 questions answered, top 3 tips, however you want to approach it. But if you had 3 things to say to the audience about tips, other than, I guess, number 1, buy this great book. But what would 2 and 3 be?
Well, I think that, all the surveys and responses I get from retailers and large consumer packaged companies is how can we improve our ability to forecast demand in this digital economy, and also how can we handle disruptions in the future like COVID? And then the second follow-up question is always what data do we need? Because you can't really do good analytical modeling without good data. So one of the things we learned at SAS, 45 years ago, is that in order to apply analytics, you have to have good data. So we've always been able to provide access data in almost any format today. So for example, we can access SAP data, Teradata, any kind of data in any format, but pretty much we can access that data, normalize it, harmonize it, and store it either in a data lake and a demand signal repository, enterprise data warehouse, and then run the analytics. And we can even run it in memory in real time using, like I said, at the edge. So that's the second question. And then the third question, I guess, would be, how do I position this with my executive team to get their buy-in? Because the biggest challenge that companies have when they try to move from a non-analytics driven organization to an analytics-driven organization is their own corporate culture.
Yeah, it's not the tech, right? It's not the vendor base. It's culture, right? It's
culture,
giving up control basically to not even control, but just that perspective, right? It's gut instinct versus analytics a little bit. That's probably at the extremes of both sides, but that's interesting. That's often really both the hurdle and the enabler, I guess, at the same time, right?
Yeah, and so it requires not only a champion, but a champion who reports into an executive sponsor who's in the C-level suite in order for that change to occur. And what happens is, in many cases, the change does occur. And the focus has to be around changing people's skills, implementing horizontal processes, because most processes in companies are vertically aligned, not horizontally aligned. So they're not aligned across organizations. Like sales and marketing use different data. They have different performance metrics from the supply chain. They don't hardly talk to each other. And that's the reason why a lot of these processes like S&OP and integrated business planning fail, because they're not horizontally connected in sharing performance metrics. And then it requires scalable technology and data. And then even when they get adoption, usually what happens when they get adoption, a champion gets promoted or moves on to another project. And everyone falls back to the old way they were doing things. So it's not sustainable. It didn't stick. So in order for it to stick, you need to replace that champion until it does stick. It may take only 6 months, or it may take 2 years. When it came to forecasting, when I was a director of forecasting and planning, I was that champion, and I reported to a senior vice president. And in one case, I actually reported to the CEO and president. So I carried a lot of clout, and I was there permanently. So I was the permanent champion. So not only did we get adoption, but it was sustainable. So you have to remember, you can always get adoption, but is it sustainable? Are they going to continue to do it after that champion leaves and use the technology?
Well, my guest is Charlie Chase. The book is Consumption-Based Forecasting and Planning. The company is SAS. Charlie, how do folks get in touch with you or learn more? Where do they go?
Okay, well, they can email me. I think you have my email at charlie.chase@sas.com. I'm also out on LinkedIn. I have over 4,200 followers on LinkedIn, and I have several hundred on Twitter as well. So I'm on those two platforms. But the easiest way is send me an email or message me through LinkedIn.
Very good. And is there any resources, if we went to SAS.com over and above the book, any you put up thought leadership papers up there? Is anything we could go to?
Yeah, I forgot to mention, I have a blog. I have a SAS blog site and author page too. So you can, a lot of the blog articles that I write end up being chapters in books.
Right.
And then I was writing a column in a journal Business Forecasting, a quarterly column, but I had to stop because I got a little busy. But those are other options. And also go to Predict and Plan Demand under retail and consumer products on the SAS website. So again, go out to the SAS website, look for under retail and consumer products goods, and then under Predict and Plan for Demand, and you'll find a lot of white papers there. Many of those white papers I've written are co-authored with a lot of my colleagues, and then also other information, customer success stories, videos, and others. Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, it's a comprehensive, good discussion, comprehensive set of data, so to speak. Both those resources, which I'll put in the show notes in the book. And listen, thanks for joining me on The Voice of Retail. Great discussion, fascinating work, and certainly topical each and every day. So, Charlie, once again, thanks for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was a great and good time. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.